Welcome along to South Today's Sport, the special edition replacing our netball coverage from earlier in the evening, but I'm sure you'll think it's worth it. It's the announcement, the very first of many no doubt, about the Rugby Southland restructure. It came out late this afternoon regarding the funding in particular to make sure they can continue with the restructure process. Now, I'm going to read the opening part of the statement, which summarises some of the facts, and then we'll have a discussion at length about the detail. Now, the change managers have worked with the New Zealand Rugby Union, the Invercargill Licensing Trust and the Community Trust of Southland, and Rugby Southland has secured funding for the next 3 years. And this is how the funding is made up. It's a $1.5 million one-off contribution, which will pay for historic debts and fund immediate costs, which will clear that debt we announced earlier in the year with Owen Shaw, the chairman. The New Zealand Rugby Union, the Invercargill Licensing Trust and the Community Trust of Southland have each contributed $500,000 to clear those debts. In addition, the ILT and the ILT Foundation will contribute $750,000 for the 2011-2012 year, with commitments beyond 2012 to be reviewed annually. The Community Trust of Southland will contribute $250,000 per annum for 2011, 12 and 13. And therefore the slate is clean on the finances. They must start all over again, but there's a lot of work to be done to ensure the position is not repeated. Joining me now to discuss the financial package and, of course, the structure beyond is the CEO of the Community Trust of Southland, John Prendergast. Thank you for joining me, John.
Thanks, Tom.
Now, this is exciting for rugby fans. It looks like at least an immediate fix, but there is a path to follow.
Well, immediate fix and a long-term fix, provided it's accompanied by change at Rugby Southland to the way they operate, so that we never ever end up in this situation again. It's a substantial bailout package from New Zealand Rugby Union, Invercargill Licensing Trust and Foundation and the Community Trust of Southland. It's a bailout that hasn't been reached easily or without a lot of thought and a lot of work, but it will secure Rugby Southland's future. It will secure a Southland team, a competitive Southland team into the future. But as I say, there needs to be the continuation through to completion of the change management process so that the governance and management of Rugby Southland is appropriate and adequate for the future.
This gives them a flying start though, doesn't it?
Oh,
I've done some maths. There was a $450,000 loss, that's cleared obviously, and some money to work with in the short term.
Yes, but the budget for 2011 is forecasting a deficit of close to $500,000. So that's why there's a $1.5 million bailout package needed. There was a deficit for the 2010 year of close to $500,000. There's a deficit for the 2011 year forecast of another $500,000, or around about that figure. There's some working capital that they need, and so those factors combined are why it's $1.5 million. Okay.
So you're quite clearly saying, all three parties, we don't expect you to fix this tomorrow. We know you've got some long-standing commitments, but once they're taken care of, you've got to be self-sustainable.
Yeah, the long-standing commitments are the contractual arrangements that Rugby Southland had entered into for this 2011 season. Mm-hmm. So this package enables those contractual commitments to be honoured, and they are mostly around player payments. Player payments across the country, there's a reduced salary cap. So the salary cap currently is $1.35 million. Mm-hmm. Southland has contractual commitments for 2011 of around $2 million. So there's a transition process to get them down to a sustainable level that will be reached by certainly into 2012 and 2013. That player payment costs will be down substantially to within the salary cap of 1.35.
And consistent with other provinces to
yeah, and that's important, otherwise Southland loses their competitiveness, and nobody wants to see that. There's no point being in the ITM Cup if you can't run a competitive team. But at a salary cap of $1.35 million, everyone is at that level, and so that's viable. And the salary cap, and a few people have said this, the salary cap that a team or a union operates needs to be what they can afford. The 1.35 salary cap, or the 2 million when it was at that level, is a target, but if you haven't got the money to pay at that level, you don't pay at that level, because otherwise you end up insolvent.
The key, I suppose, the pressure on the rugby unions is to stay in Division 1 now there's a split, because that's where the profile is.
Yes.
There won't be an easy way to work through.
It won't be easy, but no, the finances of Rugby Southland won't be a factor in... they won't go against Southland staying in Division 1.
Okay.
They will still be on a competitive level with everyone else.
Which is absolutely what everyone wants.
Yeah.
And
our objective, and the objective of all the parties in this, when we started in December, was, yes, there is a major problem with the finances of Rugby Southland and the way that's been run. We want to see if there is a solution to that, so that the end goal, which is to have a continuing competitive Southland Stags team, but also to have community rugby strong.
Yep.
That was the end objective for all of the parties, and that's what we've been working to, and that's where we've got to. And it's taken a substantial amount of funding to get there.
Absolutely. One part of that funding should make clear the NZRU money is a loan, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So part of the ongoing funding is to repay that loan, or to help repay that loan?
No, that loan will be repaid by Rugby Southland generating surpluses in future years sufficient to enable them to service that loan. And the forecasts that have been done are based around that, having to repay that debt.
Okay. So the Community Trust, the ILT, NZRU all agree on the path forward, what the structure would roughly look like, without any details yet to hand?
The change management team are still working through that process.
But they've given you enough to be confident?
Yeah, and our funding is contingent on that process running through to completion. We have said that there needs to be a fundamental overhaul of the governance and the management of Rugby Southland. And that's our expectation.
Is there a time frame around that?
The change managers are going to report to us in the first week of April with their report and recommendations.
Okay, will that see the change managers stay in place?
That's the end of phase one.
Right.
The next phase, I guess, is for an ongoing CEO of Rugby Southland to be identified and appointed. So that process will get underway shortly. But there was no point with that position even being advertised until Rugby Southland's finances have been put in order, because anyone looking at applying for the job of CEO of Rugby Southland when Rugby Southland was insolvent, you're not going to get a lot of applicants. So that financial issue has now been... that financial... Well, you might get some applicants, but probably not the ones you want.
That's correct.
So that financial platform has now been secured, and there's a much better basis to now begin advertising for a CEO.
Okay, just want to read a statement too from the Invercargill Licensing Trust Chairman, or President I should say, Alan Dennis, not able to be with us tonight, just saying that the ILT and the ILT Foundation have been the major funders of Rugby Southland for many years, and it follows therefore that we have a significant interest in ensuring positive change is made for the future. And just underlining what John has said, with the robust processes undertaken by the change management team, we believe that following the current bailout package, Rugby Southland can remain financially viable in the future. Now, one feature and one thing that's come back to me, John, a lot through this whole discussion, and we are responding to just constant emails and approaches I've had about information, about the change, about the transparency required, so the public know exactly what's going on, no surprises. Is that part of the deal?
That's critically important. And the Community Trust, when our trustees passed their resolution, well, a couple of things. Before Christmas, when the resolution was passed to initiate this action, part of our board's resolution was that there be absolute public transparency about what has happened and what is going to happen. And that is really important, because there's been a lot of misinformation or lack of information about what actually happened at Rugby Southland. And we saw through January some exchanges through the media about the rights and wrongs of it. Equally, when our trustees have passed the resolution to approve the contribution to this funding package, they've put the same proviso on it, that there be absolute transparency about what's happening, because the public needs to know and to understand why a community funder like us, for example, is putting $500,000 into Rugby Southland. It's a huge amount of money. It'll be probably the biggest grant we'll do this year, if not, well, amongst the biggest grants that we do this year. And so public transparency and accountability is really important to us.
And part of the feedback we've had is from people around town who made plenty of money and a lot of good times during the Shield era where there's a lot of people in town, 17,000 in one game, 14,000 in another. It was great for the community. It wasn't kept track of. We didn't actually have anything to measure it by, but anecdotally, it was a good time. So therefore, they were surprised when not everyone made money, least of all Rugby Southland, and they don't want to be caught in that position again.
They're not the only ones, believe me. Yeah, it was. I mean, the financial situation that Rugby Southland ended up in was simply unacceptable. The way it got there was unacceptable, and that's why there needs to be fundamental change.
Yep. And Owen Shaw, again, issues his apology out of town. The chairman, he's acknowledged that they got some things wrong, as we heard on the show before, but he did want to say that they remained indebted and thank the parties for the confidence they've placed in Rugby Southland. That's all three parties. And he thanked his fellow directors for helping to work through that process as well. So it sounds like there is an accord to make this work, but it could be a bumpy road, which is another reason for that transparency. There's no quick fix here. It is because it's quite complicated and you don't have control over all the aspects.
No.
The Rugby Southland don't have control because
well, Rugby Southland do. The Rugby Southland board needs to have control over all aspects of their operation. And in the future, that's our expectation, is that they will have.
Apart from the fact like the competition changes like every 5 minutes, you would think the structure and the costs. Now that's a hard thing for any board to foresee, isn't it?
Yeah, we're in the fortunate environment, I guess, where the competition cost structure is actually coming down now rather than going up, because there has been so much pressure on the 14 ITM Cup unions, financial pressure. Southland's not alone in the financial struggles that it faces.
It's quite a big group, actually, isn't it?
Well, of the 14 unions, I think there's possibly 10, which begs the question, why on earth has it come to this point before something was done about it? The answer, I guess, is that the salary cap is coming down, and that's the key to the future viability of provincial rugby in New Zealand, actually.
It's a rocky road to professionalism, isn't it, been? New Zealand went from amateur rugby to in a relatively short period of time, and everyone didn't quite know where all the players at different levels fitted who wanted to make a living out of it.
Yeah, and that's starting to become clearer now, but it has taken quite a long time. But if you think of the three tiers, you've got an All Black level, which clearly is professional. You've got Super 15, which, in my own personal view, can be professional as well, fully professional. ITM Cup, I don't think provincial rugby in New Zealand can sustain a situation where an ITM Cup player can expect to have a full-time living just by playing ITM Cup. But that's the situation that provincial unions have got themselves into, and they need now to get themselves out of.
Because they just can't generate the support, can they? I mean, the sponsorship to cover those, as well as the operating costs of running the game here.
Well, I mean, ticket sales from rugby in a good year might be $400,000 or $500,000. But
it's a small percentage, isn't it, from the total pool?
Yeah, and then you've got a player cost of $2 million, so something doesn't work there. There's a bit of a gap.
You should only field three players a game at that rate, whatever the maths is. I didn't do the maths. Now, the rugby union, they also expressed concerns, but they seem to be happy with this because there was a reluctancy initially for them to make a contribution, but there was a change of mind there.
No, I don't know if there's a change of mind. They would be reluctant to make a contribution or to create a precedent that they couldn't follow in other unions, I expect, because if there's 9 or 10 unions out of the 14 that are recording deficits this year, then that suggests that a number of them are struggling. And so I can understand New Zealand Rugby wouldn't want to make an arrangement with Southland that they couldn't replicate with other unions if they were approached. And that's where the loan has come in, I suspect, that that's something that they can comfortably offer to other unions too.
It's an unusual governance because technically the rugby unions own the NZAU, aren't they?
Yeah, and New Zealand Rugby would argue that each of the unions are sovereign entities in their own right. So it is, it's a bit like a cooperative, I guess. In fact, it is.
Okay, so timeline again, just repeating where we're going to go to next step is next week, the week after next.
Week after next.
You'll get a report.
Get the report.
How detailed will that? Will that be a final recommendation on that? There's nothing more to be done, or will you ask? Could you ask them to go back and check on a few things that you're not happy with?
It's difficult to say that without having seen the report, so I'm not sure, Tom. Our expectation is that it will contain their recommendations, their findings and their recommendations. Which we've already got the guts of it, I guess, around the financial position. which is as bad as what we feared it might be, and that's why it's needed the $1.5 million package. But the important things for us, the funding's part of it, but the changes to the organisation are equally important to us. Because if the changes aren't made at the organisational level, then there's no point putting the money in.
Okay. The reason I push the timing is because I'm sure with the World Cup to organise and with an ITM Cup, the staff, the people who have to run the game here would like that peace of mind of knowing where they're going. And
and I can understand that, and I expect and I feel a lot of sympathy for the staff who have had uncertainty. They haven't known what the future is going to hold. So I guess the financial package announced today provides some degree of certainty for the organisation going forward. That they have got a financial platform now. But yeah, it's not an easy time. I mean, I used to be a receiver, and I used to deal a lot with people in a similar situation, and the biggest problem is uncertainty. So the more that certainty can be restored to those people's lives, the quicker that happens, the better.
And that would be true of a regular year, but one where you're organising a few World Cup games, maybe an extra third one.
And arrangements are ongoing for those. I mean, there's a Highlanders game coming up on the 1st of April, and arrangements are in place for that game to happen, and hopefully a huge crowd turns up. Similarly with the 2 World Cup games scheduled here for September.
And maybe 3.
Maybe 3, yeah, who knows. Plans are well advanced for those as well. So yeah, there's a lot of work going on in the background at rugby.
Southland won't get any income, by the way, from those World Cup games. It goes into the pool, so it's not gonna, it doesn't matter about the crowd, but it will still be good for the town.
Absolutely.
Which is a concern for all the trusts, is what's good for the community as a whole, not just for rugby, but of course recognising what they do contribute.
Well, we've put some funding into assisting hosting the Rugby World Cup games, ourselves and the City Council and the Licensing Trust. And it's for that reason, that it's good for the city and Southland to be able to host games of that magnitude. And we saw it in 1987. I don't remember 1987, but we had a couple of games here. I think Tonga played Wales.
And Jeff Wilson was the ball boy.
Yes, I think he was. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on who the ball boy is this year.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think he'll be as good. With all due respect, I wish he would. It would be. Let's just say, to take it one more step further, they've come up with the recommendations, the change management team. They're implemented. 12 months down the line, what are the checks and balances? Have you got, is that part of it? Is the board going to report back to both the funders and the NZRU?
The board, like any grant applicant, I guess, that we deal with, we will get a report each year on what's happened. Checks and balances, I guess one of them is that if we end up in this situation again, we won't be here because this is it. And Rugby Southland are well aware of that. But there will be the normal checks and balances. We will get the budget from the board. We'll get regular reporting back to make sure that they're on budget and there's no deviation. So just as with any other grant applicant, really.
John Prendergast, thank you very much for joining me and for having to explain that announcement today. So that funding is in place. Well done to, of course, the Invercargill Licensing Trust, the Community Trust of Southland, the NZRU, in putting this into place. And I can say on behalf of a lot of rugby fans, there'll be a huge sigh of relief tonight that their team and their province will be well served by rugby in the next few years, and I'm sure well managed. That will be the South Today tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.